All right, for those of you who didn't do so well on the third strand, here we go. So number one was the respiration system of frogs differs from mammals because of what? So let's remember a word, and that word, let's see here, is metamorphosis. It is one way that organisms can change over time. This happens during your life, and so what happens is all of these different forms of a frog have the same exact DNA. However, different parts of it are read during different stages of life. Tadpole DNA will be read during the tadpole stage, and then we will get a young frog, and then we will get the older frog. And those are all just different genes that are read on the same DNA. So what sounds like metamorphosis? Do they have lungs as hatchlings? Well, no. When they're hatchlings, they're swimming around. So they actually have gills when they're young. So that's not right. Have gills throughout their entire life. That's not true. There are no gills on a frog. So that's not it. Breathe only through their skin. Frogs do have the ability to absorb some oxygen through their thin and mucousy skin. However, they also have lungs. Actually, frogs right now are suffering from a fungus infection where their skin becomes too thick and they actually are suffocating. But nonetheless, they also have lungs. So the only answer left is D. They hatch with gills, which they do. They have gills. And then they develop lungs as they get older. So that's just metamorphosis. 2. Which animal develops in a cycle most similar to the one shown above? So this is pretty simple. We got a fly here, and it's coming out of this pupa, and this is another form of metamorphosis. And so real quick, since this is the second metamorphosis question, I want to compare that to evolution. And so what's the difference? Well, metamorphosis here can happen during one lifetime. This is all one life cycle. Now, if the larva had given birth to a fly, that would be evolution. Evolution requires generational change. One generation changing the next. But this is not that. This is one life. And so what's most similar? Well, pretty much you just have to know it's a moth. Moths also hatch from pupa. We've probably seen caterpillars hatching from cocoons, and they can become a moth. 3. During a trip to a rainforest, a scientist discovered a new organism living near some rotten logs. The scientists observed that the organism had moist skin, so that's important, no hair, and an internal skeleton, and that it laid its eggs under a log. So it has eggs. So this is just chapter 25, and if you haven't looked at chapter 25 and you find this kind of stuff difficult, you might want to do so. It's one of our longer chapters. It's the last chapter for the entire year, and it's all about animals. So what's going on here? Well, we've got this animal here, which is in the description. It's got smooth skin. You can see it's actually pretty shiny. And then you look at this animal here, and you can see if you look, it has scales. Now, both of these animals seem pretty similar, but they're actually in two different phyla. The first one is the amphibian phyla, and that includes frogs, which also have moist skin, and toads, and, of course, I was going to say lizard, but that's what this thing was. Why can't I think? Salamanders. Why couldn't I think? Salamanders. So that's a salamander, and then we compare it to this guy here, which is a lizard. And lizards are reptiles. And of course, we're asking for moist skin, so it's amphibian. Now this says internal skeletons, so A is obviously not the answer. It has no hair, so it can't be a mammal. And of course, it's smooth, so it can't be a reptile. Just got to know chapter 25 for that stuff, folks. All right, a triplet code of bases for RNA may be represented by all of the following except what? So this is just something you have to know. DNA is different than RNA. DNA, let me get a better color here. DNA is double-stranded, and it has these bases. It has adenine, which we use A, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Furthermore, if you look on the inside here, they are attached to each other, and we call this Chargaff's rule. A always attaches to T, and C always goes with G, right? Then we look at RNA here, and one big difference is that it's single-stranded. It's also usually a lot smaller than DNA. And it has these bases. Now notice most of them are the same, except this one here and here. And so when you make RNA from DNA, the rule is if you have DNA of these bases here, A, T, C, and G, you only read one of the two strands, and so the strand that we read we call the coding, or sorry, not the coding, that's the one that you don't use, the template strand. We only copy one of the two strands, and this is how you copy it. A will become U instead of T. T still becomes A, C still becomes G, and G still becomes C. And so which of these can be RNA? Well, here we have a T, so that can't be the answer. Here, oh wait, that's what the question is asking. It's saying all of these can be RNA except what? Except which? So that can be it, because there's a U. There are no T's in here, so that's fine. There are no T's in here, so the answer is this. It's that T right there. You cannot have T's in RNA. And again, you don't see any T's there. So 5. What structure is common to all 6 kingdoms of life? Okay, so let's go through these. Nucleus. Well, here we see a kingdom here. We've got bacteria, and we've got archaea. Now, those are 2 prokaryotes, and we know that they are just too small to have a nucleus. So, sorry, nucleus is not the answer. What about a mitochondria? Once again, the bacteria and the archaea are just too small for that, so that's not going to work. And then cell wall. Well, animals are very flexible, and they don't have cell walls. Now the others do. A plant has a cell wall made of cellulose. This is something you should know. Cellulose is basically just a sugary cell wall. And then fungi have chitin. And that chitin has holes in between it, so it kind of looks like this, only there's a hole in the middle, if that makes any sense. Protists can sometimes have a cell wall. An example would be a diatom, which is like plankton, but with a shell. And they make that of silicone, usually. So all of these can have cell walls. Bacteria can have peptidoglycan, which means protein and sugar. And archaea have chitin or peptidoglycan. To be honest, they're very strange. They have a lot of different things. So the answer is they all have DNA. All of these other things, they don't. That's the one thing they all have in common. DNA. 6. As a result of the above experiment, which actually isn't above anymore, it's now over here, responses of planaria, which is this flatworm here, to different environmental stimuli were recorded. Planaria seem to have the strongest response to what? So here we have all the responses. I love graph questions. They're just the easiest. You don't have to know anything. Like, for more than half of this test, you don't have to know a thing. You just have to be able to look at a graph and interpret it. Isn't that great? I love graph questions. I can't say that enough. You see a graph? Get happy. Okay, so let's look at the graph and let's get happy. So these numbers are simply telling us how much are they reacting, right? So let's just sort of it's asking you which has the strongest response. Planaria has the strongest response to what? So let's start with light. Looks like they have a response of 10 to move away, and that's pretty big compared to the rest. But let's keep going. Sound, they kind of have an equal response here, toward and away from it. So that's kind of ambiguous. I would say sound isn't it. If they have an equal response toward and away, that just sort of seems like it's making them move. I don't know if that's a good response. Same with magnetism. And then gravity, it is having a response. It's having more of a response than away, but it's not as significant as light. So I'm going to go with light as my answer. 7. Which of these is most likely related to the oak weevil? Okay, so this is a misleading question. What they want you to do is to look at the insect and try to see what it looks like. You might be tempted to look at that and see this and think that's the answer. But, wait, maybe it is. Oh, that's funny. It actually is. So, I guess you could have done this two ways. You could have looked at the insect, but what you're supposed to do is actually look at the name. That's the giveaway. So, every species has a genus and species name. So, us, for example, we are Homo sapiens. The genus is capitalized and the species is not. And if you want to find something really related to us, you just look for something with the same genus. So, for example, one of our closest relatives that's now extinct is Homo neanderthalensis. This guy was actually around when we were. It was a different species of human, which is crazy to think of. It's like Lord of the Rings with dwarves and elves. Used to be real. There used to actually be different humanoids that weren't humans. If that makes sense. Anyway, so you're supposed to look here, and that's the giveaway. So this guy right here has the same genus name, and none of the other ones do. And furthermore, it just kind of looks the same too. So the easy answer here is, I guess... Oh, wait, I didn't really tell you what's A, B, C, or D. So I'm going to say this is A, B, C, and D. Yeah. B. Sorry about that. Okay, blood is considered a tissue. Why? I think some of you already went over this in class. So it's pretty simple. Here's how it goes, right? You've got proteins, and those are made by the instructions you inherit from your DNA. And then you put those proteins together to make cells. Those cells make tissues. And those tissues make organs. Organ systems, etc., etc. So what makes it a tissue? Well, we have to have all of those cells there be very similar and perform a task together, right? So that is why. So let's see, it's composed of red and white blood cells working together and having specific functions. That is why it's an organ. Or, yeah, tissue, my bad. Tissue. 9. Which of these is a common adaptation for mammals in an aquatic environment? Aquatic means in the water. Okay, so common adaptation, the most common. So obviously, there are some fish that have great eyesight, but of course there are things like the anglerfish, which are mostly blind. So that's not really true. They don't always have great eyesight. Fur would be terrible because you would not be able to swim. That'd be like trying to swim with a fur coat. It would be really hard. It would weigh you down. Sharp teeth. I mean, what about whales? Whales have baleen. They don't even have teeth. So that's not really true. Not all things that swim have teeth, but they all have to be streamlined, which is what this swimmer is doing here. This is called a streamline kick. I actually swim, and this is one of the workouts that you do. You push off the wall like this to practice letting water go over your body like this. You're cutting the water, and you're like a missile. So that's called being streamlined. And you can actually see this swimmer here is not even breaking the surface tension of the water with her streamline, and that's helping her to rocket through the water. So a lot of aquatic organisms use this strategy in the designs of their bodies to help them swim faster. 10. What conclusion can be drawn from the genetic information above, or I guess to the side here? So we've got F1, and then we got F2, right? F1 individuals are all black. Okay, so that would be these guys here. So their parents were black and white. And then the F2, which is these guys here, they're going to be 75% black, which is like this. And then one of them is going to be white. And so why was that? Well, the answer is obvious. So if we look here in the F1, they are heterozygous, which means there is a lowercase b hiding in the gametes, and they can come back together. So first they segregate in the F1, and then they just come back together in the F2. So let's see. All the white rabbits are heterozygous. That's not... These are gerbils, but it's the only picture I could find. Let's see. Right, well, the black ones are heterozygous, right? The black ones are, so that's not right. The white ones have to be recessive. All the F1 rabbits carried a recessive allele. That's actually true. The white parents carried a dominant allele. That's not true. Look at the white parent. All the black rabbits in the F2. What is it? What? They're not all black. Look at that guy right there. So that's not it. So it's only B that works. And there. So I would have drawn this picture. This is a picture I would have drawn. And so what I would have done is I would have started here. And I would have just said, okay, so there's a Punnett square, and 25% will be white, so it's probably recessive. So I would just use a letter. I'm going to use A this time. And then the rest would be black. So how would that look? Well, it's probably going to be like this. And then we don't really know what the second letter is, but we do know what made this here. We know that one parent had to be like this, the other had to be like this, and then the other allele has to be like this. And so then we can fill it in. See how we kind of went in reverse right there? Very clever, wasn't it? Look what I did. And so now we actually know the parents. So I just sort of did a Punnett square in reverse. Got to be kind of clever there, and that will give you your F1. I hope that made sense. Oh, come on. You can do it. You can do it. There we go. Okay, a genetic pedigree showing that only males are affected by a certain disorder is evidence of what? So it should be a pretty easy, just look. Sex means gender, and this is talking about a gender-only trait. So it's obviously C, but let's talk about what that actually means. So this is a human karyotype, which means it's a picture of chromosomes. And as you can see, these are non-duplicated. If they were duplicated, just so you know what you're looking at, they would look like this instead, each one. So we can get karyotypes looking like either. This one is non-duplicated, or a cell that has already divided. And here we see 2 X chromosomes. Now, if this was a guy, one of those would almost be missing. It would just be a little Y chromosome right here. And that's the difference between men and women. And so the implications of that is basically men are haploid for a lot of traits because one of these chromosomes is basically missing for them. And so if you're a man and you have a recessive trait on an X chromosome, you're screwed. You don't have an extra chromosome to help you. So for example, if red means affected by, let's say, I don't know, infant cancer. You get cancer as an infant and it kills you, right? And let's say it's X-linked recessive. So if you're a female here, she doesn't have cancer and the father also doesn't have cancer. But then what happens? So the father's going to give his good allele and the mom's going to give her a bad one. One daughter's okay. The other, she's a carrier though, so she can have children with it. The other daughter is completely unaffected and the male here is unaffected. But this poor guy got a bad chromosome from his mom and his father was no help because the father's going to give him always a Y and that's going to be missing alleles. So basically men are haploid for recessive or dominant alleles on the X chromosome, meaning they are more likely to be affected by negative things like this. So that's just, again, that's sex-linked traits. Okay. Moving on. 12. How are we doing on time? I guess okay. Biochemical substances in the human body are maintained at about a neutral pH, except for what? So what's a neutral pH? 7. So it goes from 1 to 7 to 14. And first we've got, the acids. And then we got the bases, which are sometimes called alkaline. And so what do we not keep like water? Well, that's pretty obvious. That stuff right there. So you break down your food with stomach acid. So stomach acid is an acid, which means it's not neutral. Pretty simple. 13. These data were collected by observing responses of different organisms to light. Which conclusion is supported by this data? I love this question because you have to know a lot. You have to read chapter 25 for this. You just do. You got to know it. Look at chapter 25. All right, so it's just asking you basics about these different kingdoms. So earthworm is an animal. Why is it an animal? Well, it's a eukaryote like you. It doesn't do photosynthesis. It's not a decomposer. It's an animal. So yep. Animal. Then we've got a plant. We got a fungus. A paramecium is basically a single-celled eukaryote. And so that's going to be what's called a protist. And then euglena is also a protist. So those are all the different things. So first, let's start with A. Which conclusion can be supported? Decomposers are attracted to light. So let's go to the decomposer. That's fungus. Is it attracted to light? No, it's not. There's nothing here. Right? So that's not right. Animals are attracted to light. Are they? Here's an animal. It's the only animal not attracted. Nope. Protists are not attracted to light. Well, here we have 2 protists. One of them is. One of them isn't. That's not right. So we can't say protist in general. So then it's got to be D. Organisms that use photosynthesis are attracted to light. So then who uses photosynthesis? Well, plants do, and that's a yes. And euglena is actually a green plankton. You can think of SpongeBob plankton. He's green. And he actually does photosynthesis too. So, yep, that's true. Kind of makes sense too. If you need light, you should be attracted to it. Plants do what's called phototropism for that. Let's see. 14. Did we skip one? I feel like we skipped one. Nope. Yeah, we are moving right along. Which of the following is the best evidence that this bird is nocturnal? Well, why do we have pupils? So pupils, these little things right here, that lets in light. And so if you ever shine a light in your eye in the dark, you'll notice that your pupil will shrink. Whereas if you turn the lights off, your pupil will grow. It's an aperture to let in light. Basically, the way it works is you've got this eye, right? And it's got a hole where your pupil is, or an opening, rather. And then light comes in, and it's focused on a focal point called a fovea, where you have cells that collect light, sends it to an octave nerve that goes to your brain. So if there's not a lot of light, you need bigger eyes. So it's the shape of the eyes. That's the giveaway that it's nocturnal. We can see this with other nocturnal animals. If you look at those tarsiers, which are those cute little monkey-like things that climb around on trees, they have giant eyeballs. Those are also nocturnal. I should have put a picture in here. Anyway, 15. This key... what are we doing? What are we doing? All right, there we go. This key can be used to distinguish 4 species of frogs. Okay, this is easy. This is just a dichotomous key, so we just have to answer questions. So this would be question number 1. Does it have no ridges? We can see a ridge here. We can see a ridge here. Ridges, ridges, ridges. So that's not right. So we just don't go down this line. That's a no. We go down this line. 2 prominent ridges. Yes, it does have 2 prominent ridges. There's a prominent ridge right there. There's a prominent ridge right there. That's a yes. So then we go further. Dark spots between ridges. You betcha. There's a dark spot. There's a dark spot. Look at all the dark spots. So that's a yes. So then that's a no on the other one. And then we go. There we go. We got the answer. So it's the leopard frog, which is called the Ranasphensophlyflaflufluf. So that's this one right here. 16. In squash plants, yellow fruit, which I guess is represented with this, is dominant to white fruit. Well, that's easy. Yellow. Lowercase one is white. I like to keep track of things. If 2 plants are heterozygous for yellow fruit, what babies can they make? Yep. What babies? What are the genotypes of the offspring? This is easy. We do a Punnett square. So it's 2 heterozygotes, right? So we just got to do this. Let me zoom in first, though. Let me get some room here. Move aside. Let me get some room. So 2 heterozygotes would just be like this. Boom. Mom, dad, segregate alleles, sperm and egg. Now we're going to put them together. So that's one possibility. And we have another possibility right there. And that's the same thing as, that right there. So that's 2 possibilities so far. And now we have the 3rd possibility. So that's a lot of possibilities. That's going to be all of them. You can make that, you can make that, and you can make that. D's the answer. Punnett squares, gotta love them. So easy. 17. Bivalve. Bi means 2. This is another chapter 25 question. Sorry if you haven't gotten to it. Bivalves, such as clams, oysters, all that stuff, are found in salt water. So here we have some tiny little clams. You might have seen these on the beach if you've gone to Assateague. The clams capture food particles from water that flow over its gills. Which of these is the best classification of a clam? So why are they doing this? Why are they sticking these tubes out? You can see the little valves here sticking out. So what they're doing is they're collecting plankton, protists from the water. And so that's not decomposition. That would be like a fungus breaking things down. It's not eating grass. It's not a grazer. And chunk feeding, I've never even heard of that, but I assume that's something like what sharks do. I don't really know what that is. So it's filter feeding. They're taking in plankton. 18. By the way, another example of a filter feeder would be like a whale with its baleen. It has like these hairy mouth, I guess you could say, and it filters. All right. In a plant that has red flowers, red flower color R. So this is another Punnett square. Wonderful. Love these. is dominant to white, so obviously that is white. All right, all right, all right. If the plant is heterozygous, so this is going to be hetero, which alleles can be carried by the gametes? Okay, so gametes are haploid. We got to take this diploid plant, and it can only give half of its genes to its kids. So it could give this half, or, so there's a pollen grain. I'm going to say that's pollen, which if you look at it under a microscope is got like spikes on it. And then here's a different pollen here. Those are the two different possibilities. So it can be this right here. Yay, easy. Segregation. Man, we're almost done. Many northern hemisphere birds respond to seasonal environment change by doing what? We've all seen them flying overhead, right? So this is just something you got to know. I don't really know how to like lead you to this answer. You just kind of got to know it. They migrate. They move. Why? That I can teach you. So the reason they typically migrate is because they need to nest in safer places. And so you got to think, what's a better place to nest? An inhospitable place or a hospitable place? Well, an inhospitable place, because then predators aren't there, right? So you see a lot of animals like snow geese. They migrate up to, and this is a Canadian goose, they migrate north where there's less predators because it's cold, and so more of their eggs will live. So that's probably why they do it right there. Yep. 20. Chart shows observations made of unknown organism. Based on the information, what it be? What is it? Nucleus, check. We have a nucleus. Mitochondria, check. We have one of those. Multicellular, check. We have that too. Cells grow in columns. I don't think that's us. Cells growing in columns. Here's a cell growing in columns. Cells made with chitin. Ooh, I've told you that in this lecture. Chitin cell walls. And it's a decomposer, and that right there is the dead giveaway, pun intended. But let me, before I just blurt the answer out, let me teach you a little something here. So the obvious answer is fungus. Fungus are decomposers, but let me teach you about these little hyphae things here. So if you look at a fungus, you might see this big mushroom cap. That's only the asexually reproducing part. So what I mean by asexual is they create these little spores, and these spores can get carried by wind or rain, and it can create a copy of the fungus. But actually most of the fungus lives underground in what's called hyphae, and the chunk of hyphae is called mycelium. So that hyphae grows underground, and it does a couple things for the fungus. It finds food and it decomposes it, so it secretes digestive juices from these feeding tubes. Now these feeding tubes come in several varieties. There are septic, so that means that they have separations between each cell, and aseptic, known as coenzytic. They have no separation, their nuclei just sort of float around. And so another thing these hyphae do, in addition to digesting dead stuff, is they also mate. This is how they have sex. Their hyphae touch, and they can actually trade nucleus with each other. So yeah, that's fungus for you. So the answer here, decomposer and chitin should be the giveaway. Also columns. And those columns can sometimes have septum. So like a chunk missing there. And so the answer is fungus. All right, that's all. I'm going to bed. Bye.